Hello everyone, welcome to Astro's Ike, and today I want to share with you a way in which I conceptualize cognitive functions. And this is going to be what I call Paragon Functions. Now these Paragon Functions are an idea that I had that kind of arose from a philosophy that I have regarding personal growth, MBTI, and type, and just kind of evolving and growing with your type. And that's what I want to talk about today. Let's get into it. So I've recently been thinking a lot about the idea of personal development, type, functions, how all these things are kind of related to one another. And I think that, certain functions throughout the lifespan get stronger or they get more developed, I think is a better way of saying it, as we get older and we have more experiences and we really learn from the experiences that we have. And I think that these functions can hit certain different levels of growth, from the very weakest to the very strongest. But something stands out to me about the dominant function particularly and its kind of growth journey. And I think that it in particular can get to a state that you can't get to with the other cognitive functions. And this is what I call the Paragon function. And essentially the Paragon function is going to be the dominant cognitive function of a type in its absolute kind of healthiest or most optimal kind of form, the best representation of that cognitive function in you as a person. So what is a paragon? Well, by definition, a paragon is a perfect representation of something, or it is something or someone in its highest and purest kind of form. This idea came to me when I was thinking about cognitive functions and type and development, and I was trying to think of what would a type or function look like in its highest form. And an idea or an image came to me in my head of this angelic figure with large white wings reaching towards the sky, towards like this silver shining sword. And the word paragon came to me in that moment, and I said, okay, so this is kind of what a function would look like in its highest form. It's representative by that thing that we associate with higher being. And the way that this relates to growth and personal development is how we think about people who have these paragon functions, and essentially why people who have these functions in this state tend to be remembered. We can start to see what I mean by paragon functions and how they play out in people when we look at historical figures and people who are easily remembered, or they're remembered because of their personality, and their personality and action stood out compared to most other people. So to think of a historical figure that comes to mind quite easily, think of Julius Caesar. What do we remember Julius Caesar for? He was remembered typically for being a military commander, being this very strategic person. He conquered a lot of things, a ruler essentially. What do we associate with this? Well, most people type him as an ENTJ or an ESTJ, and we see him typically as an extroverted thinking dominant type. And he is remembered because of the actions and things that he did related to those functions. We don't associate him with things like extroverted intuition or extroverted sensing. Now we can look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci. Now, what is Leonardo da Vinci remembered for? He's remembered for being an inventor. He showed this kind of paragon quality of extroverted intuition. What could extroverted intuition be in its highest form? Could it be this thing that invents and creates new things and shows the world what could be? Yes, that is what extroverted intuition could be in its highest form. And that's why I think of it as a paragon in that state. To give a kind of thought experiment with this, try and think of what was Michael Jackson for the most part remembered for, the king of pop. Well, the first thing you're probably going to think of is music, but what separated his music from other people? Why was he so remembered? In my opinion, it's because he had such a unique personality and he had a desire to self-express within that personality. When I think of Michael Jackson, I personally type him as an ISFP. I think of a paragon representation of what introverted feeling can be. What does authentic expression of the personality and my morals and desires and authenticity look like as a paragon function? What could it be in its highest form or close to its highest form? Now, when I say in its highest form, when I'm talking about paragon functions, that doesn't mean I'm saying that it's perfect or it doesn't have any flaws, even though that's essentially what paragon means. Because as human, we have flaws. We're going to have flaws. We're going to mess up frequently. But if you look at kind of the lifespan and the achievements and successes and growth of these people with these functions, you'll see that when they're at their healthiest and best, they show paragon representations of the functions. Essentially, they might enter this state. This doesn't mean that when you hit this Paragon function level, you're essentially going to be at it forever. I do think that you can go up in health and, dynamically go up and down in terms of whether or not you're in a Paragon state. You could even think of this like flow. I think certain people can reach up and enter a Paragon state with certain functions at certain times, and we can see those values represented in those moments, but they're not going to be always expressing those things. But then you look at people who can consistently do this across their lifespan, and those are the people that, to me, tend to be the ones that are remembered, and they tend to be the healthiest overall, unless they fall out of that state due to some mental health reason or another thing. The general idea of Paragon functions and being able to kind of move towards this optimal version of yourself and your functions is why I strongly have the philosophy in my coaching sessions of a person should focus on their strengths while being aware of their weaknesses. So essentially, a lot of people will come to me talking about how they wish that they could kind of conquer their weaknesses or become their weaknesses or become this thing that they are not. And I don't think that is really ever going to lead to healthy development. For me personally, I think it's much more beneficial to focus on the functions that really are you, the ones that stand out for you as an individual. Your first and second function, of course, are going to be the two that I would recommend most people kind of focus their time and energy into. The second one, the auxiliary function especially, if you get that one healthy, it really supports the dominant function and gives it room and air to breathe. But I think that when you focus all your energy on your bottom functions or the functions that you're not really strong with, you're kind of wasting your time essentially, and you're moving away from what you could be. When we think of people like Julius Caesar, we don't remember him for his charm or his ability to talk nicely with people or his ability to do math or his ability to invent. We remember him for being a conqueror. When we remember Leonardo Da Vinci, we don't remember him for being a conqueror. We don't remember him for being able to play basketball or do sports or do any sort of these things. We remember him for his inventive ability. And I think that's the philosophy that I try to push in my coaching sessions, is that you should work towards being the more optimal and best version of yourself. What are your specific strengths, and what would those strengths look like in their highest form? Now, this doesn't mean that you should ignore your weaknesses. I don't think that's ever the case. But as Jung talked about strengths and weaknesses, you kind of want to be aware of your shadow. You don't ever want to become your shadow, because then you're just pretending to be someone you're not. I've told this story a million times, but in psychological types, Jung talks about the introverted thinking dominant type who's a banker or something of the sorts, and he tries to talk to clients and become this like extroverted feeling, nice and happy person, and he kind of has this mini breakdown and yells at his clients. And essentially, this is because he's trying too hard to be what his shadow is or be what his repressed side is. And when you do that, you're going to fall into a neurotic state. So that's why I have the philosophy that instead, focus your energy on what you're good at and be aware of how those negative things impact you. Don't try to be them, but do your best to avoid the negative consequences that come with them. If you want an idea of what you might look like in a Paragon state or what your function might look like best represented within you, I've ran this little experiment on my Discord server and got a few people to talk about their experiences. Think about, what would you look like as a person in your best state? What do you feel like and what do you think like when you're at your healthiest and you're feeling your absolute best? Now contrast that with what you look like or what you feel like when you're at your absolute worst. Who are you when you are at your emotional or personal worst? What does this look like? You're most stressed. Compare and contrast your best and your worst, and you might be able to see what are your real strengths and what are the things that really stress you out. And could you ever see yourself becoming the thing that you're really stressed or bad at? Is this who you really are? Is this kind of the person that you are, the thing that you're going to try and work on and try to conquer and try to be this thing that you don't really like? No, for most people, this state that they're in when they're at their worst is something that is stressful to them, and it's something that they need to learn to manage, not to be. And you want to learn how to be your best. When you think of your best, these are the skills that are best representative of you when you're at your happiest, your healthiest, and the things that will represent you as a person. And I think that if you focus on those things and work on those things, you'll get to that state where you can be closer to the Paragon function or closer to this optimal version of yourself, where you're going to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve and you're going to feel happy with those achievements. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on Paragon functions. Let me know down in the comment section below. What do you think about Paragon functions? Do you think it's a useful way of conceptualizing cognitive functions, type, and growth? If you do you think that you've ever reached that Paragon function state, or do you have any other examples of what a person who's reached that state might look like? Other than that, I would like to remind people, though, that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asuracyc.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura from Asura Psych. Have a good one.